Congregation Beth Adam and our Jewish community, we read a different Torah portion every high holidays because there's just so much in the Torah that we want to spend time exploring as much as possible. So this year, we are exploring the story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And this is one of those stories that's been told and retold again until it has become something much bigger than the text itself. So the story many of us grew up hearing was one in which a very angry God approaches Abraham, tells him that he's about to destroy a wicked, wicked city of Sodom. Now, Abraham thinks this is a little bit unfair and asks God if he'll save the city for the sake of just 50 righteous people. Then they keep bargaining, and eventually God agrees to save the city if he finds just 10 righteous people. And then the next thing that happens are two angels end up in Sodom, about to destroy the city to warn Lot and save the family. Lot is Abraham's nephew, so it makes sense that his family would get saved. And so we assume that no righteous people are found. The city gets destroyed, and at the very end, Lot's family escapes, and Lot's wife, very famously, is warned not to turn around, but she does, and becomes a pillar of salt. So it seems like a pretty simple story, a story many of us are very familiar with. And yet, what happens when we forget the legend we were told as children and explore the story and the text as it appears here on its own merit, forgetting all of the other stuff? So, what happens at the very beginning of the Sodom story? Right after God has agreed to save the city for the sake of just 10 righteous people, the very next thing that happens, Vayavo'u shnei hamlachim stoma, two angels or messengers come to Sodom. So somehow, between Abraham arguing with God and the angels' arrivals, God has decided to destroy the city, even though we thought that wasn't gonna happen. So what happens when these angels come to this wicked, wicked, wicked city? Probably they see terrible things, they have an awful time, and are like, great, let's destroy it. But no, they meet Lot at the entry to the city. Lot sees that they're strangers and they don't have anywhere to stay, so he does the hospitable thing and invites them home. They refuse, so Lot insists. They come home with him, they have their feet washed, and are well fed. Now, just a chapter earlier, some other angels masquerading as strangers came to visit Abraham and Sarah. Now, Abraham and Sarah also welcomed these strangers. They washed their feet and fed them. But Abraham and Sarah are rewarded for their hospitality with a promise that Sarah, at the ripe old age of 90, is going to conceive an heir. So here we have two stories with uncanny textual parallelism, and yet are both authors trying to accomplish the same thing? Let's see. Because unlike when Abraham and Sarah welcome the strangers, after Lot welcomes the strangers, washes their feet, and feeds them, an angry mob appears and threatens to rape them. Very different than being promised an heir. So what does Lot do? He offers his virgin daughters to the angry mob instead. This is something which actually most of our classic commentators describe as going above and beyond the call of hospitality, as in Lot was excellent. But the mob refuses the offer, and the angels have no choice but to reveal themselves as angels, blast the mob, and save the family. So here we are, narrowly escaped a very violent and very scary mob with two random strangers who seem to have some magic powers, and we have no idea that our town, our city, everyone we know is about to be destroyed. So what happens? Vayomru ha'anashim el Lot. The men said to Lot, Ad mi lecha po? Who else do you have here? Chatan uvanecha? Do you have a son-in-law and some sons? Uvnotecha? And daughters? V'kol asher lecha be'ir. And everyone you have in this city. Hotzi min hamakom. Get out of this place. So we still don't know that we're being punished, but we do know that something crazy is about to happen, which we were expecting because Abraham bargained with God. And yet, I thought that Sodom was going to be saved for the sake of just 10 righteous people. And here we have quite a few different people mentioned. We have Lot and his wife, that's 2 people, and the 2 daughters who narrowly escaped rape, that's 4. And then here we have at least 2 sons because it's in the plural, that's 6. And then a son-in-law, that's 7. 2 more daughters, that's 9. And in a town, a city the size of Sodom and Gomorrah, we can probably assume that there's at least 1 baby, 1 child who's innocent. So Sodom should be spared. And yet, if we take the text at face value, it seems like women and children don't matter. Not so shocking. Okay, so the angels just told Lot and Lot to get up, go see everyone, and get as far away from here as possible. Why? Ki mashchitim anachnu, because we will destroy et hamakom hazeh, this place. We are going to destroy this. These are not your typical angels. These are powerful angels of violence and destruction. And yet, we still have no mention of wickedness, no punishment, no righteousness. It's almost as if the story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was originally a completely separate story from the story of Abraham bargaining with God. And in fact, many biblical scholars have made exactly that argument. The first reason why scholars say this is because both stories function completely independently of each other. They each have a middle, a beginning, and an end. And other than the proper name, Sodom and Gomorrah, they don't actually reference each other. So, if we take out the proper name, Sodom, from the story of Abraham arguing with God, suddenly we get a story that's about a vengeful God who listens to humans, who changes his behavior and finds mercy because of human intervention. This is a story glorifying human agency and outspokenness. It's about human responsibility. If we do the same thing with the Sodom story, however, and in fact, we only have to take out one proper name in the entire story to do this, we end up with a story in which 2 angels come to a city to destroy it. They meet a nice man who is so hospitable to them that they decide to save him and his family. Then the city is destroyed and the family escapes, except for the man's wife who can't follow directions. This, then, is a story about a violent, decisive God who destroys cities he feels like destroying and has servants who save people they feel like saving. But then, you put these 2 stories together, add some proper names and a few editorial glosses, and suddenly everything changes. Now we have a story about a city so wicked that not even 10 good people could be found, and a God who only reluctantly destroyed them. So if we take the destruction story of Sodom on its own, it falls into this great genre of destruction stories that appear throughout the Bible. I think it's cool. There are three big ones. One of the most famous ones is the flood with Noah, when all the world is so corrupt that God decides to destroy it. And then here we have Sodom and Gomorrah that's about to be destroyed. And again, in Egypt, when the Israelites are slaves in Egypt, the Egyptian people have to be so destroyed by plagues that Pharaoh will eventually agree to let the slaves go. And in all three of these stories, one word appears: shachet, destruction or corruption. And why? Because corruption leads to destruction. Or perhaps, once a world or an entity is so corrupt, it may as well already be destroyed. It would make no difference. But we still don't know why Sodom is about to be destroyed. Okay, so the angels just said, we're about to destroy a city, and why? Ki gadla tza'akatam, for a great call, a great wail of distress has been cried out, et pnei Adonai, to the face of God, v'yishlachenu Adonai, and God will destroy them. Now this sa'akah, this wail, this cry of distress, only appears at times where things are so terrible, so awful, that our biblical protagonists felt like they had no way out. Things are just the worst. So they call out to God, and God saves them. So the Israelites, when they're enslaved in Egypt for 400 years, it is not until they let out a tza'akah, a wail of distress, that God finally hears them, remembers them, and saves them. And Job, when everything in his life is awful, he finally gives up, lets out a great tza'akah, a cry of distress. God hears him, remembers him, saves him. But here, the people of Sodom let out a great tza'akah, a cry of distress, and it seems like that's the reason why God chooses to destroy them. But why? Despite this great tza'akah, this cry of distress, many of our commentators seem to blame the citizens of Sodom for not crying out enough. Genesis Rabbah, an ancient midrash, says that no one raised his voice in protest when the crowd molested Lot's guests. Failure to protest is to participate in the sins of the community. And Eitz Chaim, a modern commentary, agrees with Midrash Rabbah and claims that the sin of Sodom was that wickedness was a public policy. But I don't know about you, but for me, the loudest voice I've heard over the years trying to claim what the wickedness of Sodom was that it was a sin of gayness. But where's the gayness in the text? Where's the flirtation, the first dates, the marriage, the proposals? There is, in fact, no consensual sex of any kind. There is, however, 3 different scenes of attempted sexual violence and violation in just one column of text. First, the strangers are threatened with sexual violence. Then Lot's daughters are threatened with sexual violence. And then, after Sodom is destroyed, Lot's daughters both plan and execute the sexual violation of their father. If there's a pattern in Sodom, it's one of sexual violation and violence. Okay, so now that we know that Sodom is about to be destroyed, we don't really know why, but we know what's happening. What does Lot decide to do next? Vayetze Lot. Lot goes out, Vaydaber el chatanav, and says to his son-in-laws, Lokhe benotav, take your sons, V'yomer, and he said, Kumu tzu min hamakom hazeh, get out, flee from this place, ki mashchita Adonai et ha'ir, because God is going to destroy the city. So another biblical hero who was faced with a remarkably similar situation, Noah, who was going to be the only family to be saved, did not go out and try to find other people to save or even tell his extended family. But here, Lot tries to do the right thing. But unfortunately, vayahi kemitzachet be'einav chatano. The son-in-laws thought that he was kidding, and so they laugh. They don't take him seriously. And so, v'kmo hashachar olah, as the sun rose, vayetzu hamlachim belot, the angels, the messengers, went out with Lot, saying, Lemor, kum, get up, Kach et ishtacha ve'et shtei bnotacha hanimsaot. Take your wife and your 2 remaining daughters, pen tisapeh be'avon ha'ir, lest you be caught up in the punishment of the city. This is our very first mention of punishment. At the end of the story, when everything important has already happened, except for the fulfillment of destruction. And the great thing about choosing to use a word like punishment is that it works regardless of which story you were reading it from. If we didn't have the Abraham story, punishment would just sound like a euphemism for violence. And yet, with the Abraham story, it draws the two together and they seem totally united. And we all know what happens next. The family runs, and amidst violent destruction, Lot's wife is turned into a pillar of salt. This story begins with hospitality and ends in violence. It does not begin with sin and end in punishment, but rather this story becomes a desperate attempt to make sense of a senselessly violent world.